So today I want to talk about using these fuzzy blankets for our backings. They're so nice and soft and really cost effective as a backing. But there are some important things to think about when you're going to maybe use one of these for your backing. The first thing you're going to want to do, buy a blanket that is significantly bigger than your quilt top. My quilt top measures 78 by 66. When I went to the store, I bought the biggest blanket I could, which was 90 by 90 inches. After measuring it, it actually measured 80 inches by 89 inches. And the reason behind this is because of these rolled edges. So these edges have been rolled and machine stitched down. They've been bound up. So that reduces the size of the blanket and is really frustrating if you buy one that ultimately, when you unpackage it, is too small. So I always like to overbuy as much as possible. The second thing I think about when I'm going to purchase a blanket like this for my backing is my top. And what I want to do is buy a blanket that maybe is going to match the colors and the tone of the top of my quilt. And that can be because sometimes with these types of blankets, depending on the nap, like on how much fuzzy stuff is on it, it can really pull through from the back, through the batting, to the top. So I always like to try and match this. You can see I have this bright sort of rich royal red, and this is my quilt top, okay? So it's got all these rich browns and oranges and reds in it. So I'm not super concerned if it pulls through. This quilt is for my dad. It's in the mail, I promise. I've totally finished it already. I've finished it by the time I'm posting this video. I hope. But I'm not super concerned that it's going to be perfect because my dad loves me. And the last thing to remember about using a blanket like this for your backing is that there is a ton of stretch. Okay, this thing stretches every which way. It stretches lengthwise, it stretches sideways. And we have to make sure that when we are using these blankets, we are not putting as much tension as we might put on to a cotton backing that doesn't really stretch as much. Because if you overstretch this and quilt it, when you take it off that frame, it's gonna shrink back and really ruin your quilt top. I only know this because I've done it. So in preparation of mounting this blanket, I actually haven't done anything. I didn't wash this backing. It's 100% polyester, so I just didn't bother. I actually haven't even cut these edges off. I was able to use my red snappers. I know they're almost the same color, but I used my red snappers and snapped them on below that folded over edging. I haven't rolled this up and back yet, but we're about to see how nice and flat I got it mounted. I am still smoothing this out as I'm rolling it back, but I'm not putting a lot of tension on that smooth. Like, I'm not pulling it. I'm just trying to keep it nice and even without a ton of tension on it. See, these edges are not going to be super lined up. And that's okay because I've bought a backing that is huge. I'm not manipulating the fabric a whole bunch, just very gentle pressure. And that came out pretty nice and flat. So I'm very happy with this mounting. So I'm just gonna go cut some batting. I am going to be using Pellin 80/20 batting inside of my quilt. I've got this Vegas Gold glide thread on both top and in my bobbin, and I'm just testing it out on this solid piece of fabric here just to see how bad the pull through might be. When I do this, I like to start with some loops. Then I like to do some zigzags. And some up and downs. And there we go. Okay, so looking at this, what I can see is that on my loops, I'm definitely pulling through quite a lot here. On my side to side, I'm not pulling through hardly at all. Like, there might be a tiny little bit coming through here. So this is going to lead me to believe that the design that I choose, because I am going to be pantographing, isn't super tight loopy like this. It's not horrible down here. It took a second after the first couple, but it's just something to think about. Another thing that you can do if this is happening and you're getting lots of pull through, change your thread color. That's why we try and match the backing to the top as much as possible. Because the reality is if I used a red thread on this quilt, that would be fine. You know, like a red thread would look just fine here. Even though I could play with my tension a little bit to maybe mitigate even more of that pull through, that is one of the reasons why I've actually matched the backing to the top as well as I have. I'm actually going to be fine with this amount of pull through. So let's just talk tension and specifically side tension for what I'm going to be applying to this particular quilt. I am actually not going to apply any side tension to my quilt. And here's why. Look at this. Like, see that pull? Like, there is so much stretch in this fabric. So I do have this reasonably tight, but not so tight that I can't grab my finger. As I advance through the quilt, if I'm noticing that there is some extra sag here, I'm probably going to apply a clamp, not necessarily the whole sidebar clamps that you might get with the red snapper systems or other systems. Let's go stitch. I'm using a pantograph called Maple Syrup because I think it really matches the vibe of this quilt and my dad in general. And here's how the stitches are starting out. And they look really good. There's a tiny, tiny touch of pull through, but the reality is I'm actually fine with it. I think it looks okay. Let's come back and check on this in a little bit. So I'm about to start my second row here, and I've decided to add a little bit of tension. As we know, when we quilt our quilts, they do shrink in and the fabric pulls in a little bit. So I'm just giving it just the right amount of tension so that it's not going to pull too much inwards anymore. So it's just a tiny little bit, not very much. All done. I'm gonna just take off these clamps. Everything's looking good. Didn't squash in on the edges, even though I had some tension on it. And I think it looks really good. Here's a close-up of how I have my red snappers on there. See, I've just kind of lined them up along the edge and snapped them on. So taking a closer look at the completed stitches, you can see a tiny bit of that red pull through there. So I think that has something to do with the fact that this backing is textured. The smoother blankets definitely don't pull through as much. This does have quite a thick nap to the back of it. So the smoother blankets definitely don't pull through as much in my experience, but there is usually a little bit of pull through. But not a lot. Like, look, see? It doesn't look too bad there. There's a little bit. But in the scheme of things, it's just so minor. And for something that, like I said, is just a private gift to my father, something he's going to use on the couch. This is just fine.